Today I want to talk about my master's project, which named Vocal, Musical, and Dramatic Construction of Female Characters in Princess Carmen, a practice-lead study of soprano performance. Have everybody know about Princess Carmen?
Yes.
Okay. Carmen was the last opera composed by French composer Georges Bizet, and it is also the opera that has been staged at the most time to date. When we think about Carmen, the first character that usually comes to our minds, of course, Carmen herself. She is one of the most famous female characters in the opera, and her image is strongly associated with freedom, sensuality, independence, and rebellion. However, there is another female character in the opera who is very different from Carmen, Michaela. My research began with a simple question. Are these two women really as simple and opposite as they are traditionally presented? And more importantly, how does Bizet construct these different identities through music, voice, and dramatic expression? Carmen has received enormous scholarly and performances attention, particularly in relation to gender, feminism, exoticism, and the female agency. Michaela, on the other hand, is much more frequently described through words such as innocent, gentle, sincere, loyal, and virtuous. This creates other convenience binary, common, rebellious, and independent, Michaela, innocent and passive. But when I began working particularly with Michaela's music, I found this interpretation increasingly difficult to accept. For me, Michaela's character is much more interesting when we consider the fact that she is afraid. She knows that the road ahead is dangerous. She knows that Carmen is a threat to her relationship. She knows that Don José has changed, and yet she continues forward. So, my research does not attempt to prove that Michaela is secretly another Carmen. Instead, I ask whether her courage can be understood as a different from a female agency. My main research question is, how does Bizet construct contrasting female identities in Carmen through musical and vocal means, and how can these constructions inform soprano performance practice? My aim is therefore not only to analyze the characters theoretically. I want to understand how musical elements such as melody, harmony, rhythm, vocal writing, and dramatic expression construct character, and then investigate what happens when these observations are actually transferred into performance. This is why the project is practice-lead. The basic process is analysis, to listen, to experiment, to reflect, to reinterpret. Previous scholarship provides several important foundations for this study. For example, Susan McGrary's work established an influential reading of Carmen as a figure whose musical language can be understood in relation to independence and resistance to conventional gender structures. Other opera scholarship has demonstrated that characterization is not created by the libretto alone, but through the interaction of music, drama, orchestration, vocal writing, and performance. Research into musical exoticism is also particularly relevant to Carmen because it uses dance rhythm, chromatic gestures, and other stylistic markers to construct her as society and cultural distinct. More recent performance-oriented research has also encouraged us to consider how interpretation, vocal color, articulation, and embodied performance contribute to character construction. However, I found a particularly useful space for my own project in bringing these perspectives together with direct vocal experimentation, especially in relation to Michaela. So, rather than attempting to create another purely theoretical interpretation of Carmen, I wanted to ask, what happens when these analytical ideas are tested by a singer? My research used a qualitative, practically methodology. There are four main stages. First, score analysis. I examined the formal structure, melody, harmony, rhythm, vocal writing, and dramatic function of selected passages. Second, comparative listening. I studied professional recording to observe different approaches to tempo, articulation, vocal color, phrasing, and characterization. Third, my own performance practice. I applied these observations to rehearsal and experimented with different approaches. And finally, reflection. I compared my initial interpretation with my later understanding and considered which musical and dramatic decisions were actually effective. This approach is consistent with the principle of practice-based research. Performance is not simply the final product of research, but can itself become a way to producing knowledge. For this reason, I select three pieces. The primary case study is Michaela's Act 3 aria, Je dis que je t'aime profondément. For Carmen, I used two shorter sporting case studies, Habanera and Segilia. The three pieces were selected because they provided contrasting musical languages and contrasting approaches to female characterization. However, I want to make one distinction clear. As a soprano, Je dis que je n'aime profondément is my primary practice lead case study. The common repertoire merely provided the comparative framework. Let us begin with Michaela. The conventional image of Michaela is relatively straightforward, gentle, innocent, sincere, and passive. But I would argue that this interpretation overlooks something very important. Michaela's defining quality is not the absence of fear. It is what she does despite her fear. In this song, she describes a temporary journey, expresses fear and uncertainty, confronts Carmen and the changed Don Jose, and ultimately gestures the courage to continue. Therefore, I interpret her psychological journey as fear, struggle, to determination, to courage. This becomes the central interpretation idea of my practical work. This song consists of an introduction recital, a complete journey design of A, B, A, and a coda. The principal tonality is E flat major, although the recitative and particularly the B section introduce tonal contrast. For my interpretation, the B section is especially important. It interrupts the relative stability of the main material and introduces a stronger emotional intensity. Therefore, I do not regard the B section simply as a conventional musical polemics. I understand it as a moment where Michaela's internal conflict becomes audible, and this leads directly to the question of how the singer should perform that transformation. The recitative establishes Michaela's psychological starting point. The important word for me here is fear. This is especially evident in the accompaniments abundance of terminal notes like this. And then, in my internal interpretation, I relied too heavy on soft singing. The song was gentle, but the dramatic meaning was not sufficiently clear. I was a sensitive singer. I am fear, but Michaela should communicate something closer to I am afraid, and I know exactly what I am walking into. The distinction is very important. Therefore, in my revised interpretation, I wanted clear consonants, slightly more urgent speech, and greater awareness of the danger described in the text. The fear should create forward movement, rather than making the music feel static. The A section develops this psychological state through the vocal line. One important feature is the use of stepwise melody, movement together with larger leaps. The continuous movement of the melody allows the character to feel as through she is psychologically moving forward. For me, this means that the singer should avoid treating the melody as simply beautiful lyrical material. It needs direction. The phrase has somewhere to go, and I would like to demonstrate this briefly. I will sing a part of the section A. And when I sing this passage now, I try to imagine that Michaela is not standing stiffly in one piece. She is physically and psychologically moving towards something that frightens her. Therefore, the ascending line becomes more than a technical musical gesture. It becomes a psychological movement. This was one of the most useful discoveries of my score analysis. The B section is where these developments become more obvious. Here, the melody gradually shifts to a minor key. The increased tempo and continuous accent signifying a gradual build-up of emotion. The dense crescendos and diminutions highlight the intense emotional intensity, creating a significant contrast to the previous material. I interpret this as a moment of internal confrontation. Michaela is no longer simply describing her fear, she is confronting it. And this is where my first performance has problematic. I did achieve a clear construct, but the anger appeared too suddenly. It sounded almost like Carmen. In other words, I had brought the emotional language of the wrong character. What I now aim for this is not explosive anger. It is controlled determination. This intensity should grow out of the fear established earlier. So, rather than fear to sudden anger, I want fear to tension to inner resistance to determination. That distinction became control to my revised interpretation. I will sing a part of the section B. The return of the A material therefore becomes extremely important. Musically, we heard material that we have already heard, but dramatically, Michaela is no longer the same person. I therefore interpret the two A section differently. The first A section, fearful and hesitant. The B section, conflict and determination. And the second A section is resolved and courageous. So, A1 is not equal to A2. The musical material returns, but the psychological means has changed. For me, this is perhaps the most important interpretative discovery in the area. Michaela does not suddenly become fearless. Instead, she learns to move forward while still afraid, and I call this quiet courage. I also compared professional performance, particularly through by Anna Wolf and Sundin. Wolf's interpretation was especially useful to me because of her emotional control, gradual development, and great stability. Her interpretation demonstrates that intensity does not necessarily require exaggerated dynamics. Sabin's performance offered a different perspective, particularly through clear and more prominent consonants and articulation. These two approaches help me recognize that characterization can be communicated through very small vocal decisions. It is not only about how loudly or dramatically we sing, it is also about how we speak through the voice. This becomes most obvious when I compared my own initial performances with my revised interpretation. In my earlier recording, I was technically focused. The song was controlled, but emotionally rather fault. The recitative was too soft and did not communicate sufficient fear. In the A section, I was so focused on creating a clear like quickly like the tempo became slow and static. In the B section, I successfully created construct, but the ender appeared too suddenly, and when the main theme returned, I essentially reproduced my first interpretation. Therefore, the emotional journey had disappeared. My received approach was different. In the recitative, I introduced greater tension through clear diction and slightly more urgent speech. In the A section, I allowed the emotional intensity to develop progressively. In the B section, I aimed for determination rather than Carmen-like anger. And in the final return, I wanted Michaela to songs as through she had found her inner strength. So the development became technically controlled singing to character-driven singing, or more simply, for singing the note to communicating the journey. Then let's come to Carmen. In Habanera, the musical language is immediately different. This aria centers on the alternation between D major and D minor and D major. And this rhythmic design includes continuous triples, dotted rhythmic partners, and descending chromatic frets. This feature creates a sense of rhythmic and harmonic instability. For me, this instability is not merely decorative. It contributes to Carmen's identity as a woman who refers to remain musically or socially predictable. So, I interpret the musical relationship as instability to unpredictability to freedom. I also compared performances by Anna Katerina and Caballé. Their different vocal approaches demonstrate that Carmen's identity can be communicated through different combinations of vocal color, phrasing, rhythmic freedom, and dramatic intensity. Therefore, there is not one single vocal sound that automatically creates Carmen. The musical structure provides possibilities, while the performance determines how those possibilities are embodied. Sagilia provides another dimension of Carmen's agency. The piece uses a characteristic triple meter and incomplete ternary design, and frequent leaps in the 16th note writing. The melody is highly narrative, unlike Habanera, where freedom is strongly associated with musical instability. Sagilia presents freedom as strategy. Common use flirtation, language, music, and the performance to manipulate the station around her, and ultimately pursue psycho freedom. So, I understand the two pieces together as Habanera, freedom as identity, Sagilia, freedom as strategy. This distinction helped me avoid treating Carmen simply as a seductive woman. She is an active agent who understands how to use performance itself as a form of power. When these characters are placed side by side, their differences become clear. Carmen's agency is primarily external. She acts upon the world around her. Her musical language is unstable, rhythmic, sensual, and unpredictable. Michaela's agency is more internal. She struggles with fear, but ultimately chooses to continue. Her music language is more lyrical and structurally developmental. Therefore, common means active freedom. Michaela, quiet courage. But I want to emphasize that this is not a moral opposition. Common is not simply the bad woman, and Michaela is not simply the good woman. Both are women who pursue something they believe in. Common pursues freedom, Michaela pursues loyalty, love, and moral conviction. What differs is how their agency is expressed. This is lead to one of my principal findings. This constructs two contrasting forms of females' identity through different musical languages. For common, instability, rhythmic vitality, sensually and dramatic strategy become musical representations of freedom. For Michaela, lyricism, emotional progression, internal stability, and controlled intensity can represent not passivity but resilience and courage. Therefore, the contrast between the two women is more complex than rebellious versus innocent. It is better understood as two different forms of agency. The practical contribution of this project is therefore not to propose one virtually correct way of performing these characters. Instead, it proposed a way of working. The process is score analysis to character interpretation to listening to alternation performances to practical experimentation to reflection to revised performances decision. In my own case, this process directly changed my approach to jeudi que je n'ai pas profonde. The analysis changed how I understood Michaela. That understanding changed my phrasing, diction, packing, emotional progression. And those changes ultimately changed the way I saw the character. So, the main practical contribution of this project is the connection between analytical knowledge and embodied vocal design making. There are also several limitations that I should be acknowledged. First, the repertoire examined in the project is relatively limited. I focused on only 3 excerpts from Common, and therefore the findings cannot represent the entire of this characterization across the opera. Second, the practical investigation is significantly stronger for Michaela than for Common. My detailed practice-led experimentation concentrate on jeudi que je n'ai pas profonde. For Common, I primarily used score analysis and comparative listening to professional performances. Therefore, I would not claim that I have conducted an equally extensive practical investigation of both characters. Third, the practical evidence is based primarily on my own experience as a single woman. This is appropriate for a practice-led master's project, but it also means that some findings are inevitably influenced by my individual voice, technical background, and interpretative performances. Finally, the project was conducted within a limited period of time. Ideally, the development of the dynamic fountain would involve several additional circles of recording, reflection, feedback, and re-recording. Therefore, the final interpretation should be understood as a stage in an ongoing artistic process rather than a definitive solution. Importantly, however, I do not consider these limitations to invalidate the findings. Instead, they define the scope of the project. The strongest claim I can make is not that I have established the definitive interpretation of Michaela, but that practicing experimentation allowed me to identify the task-specific interpretative problems in my own performance, and that is precisely where the research became useful. There are several directions in which this research would be developed. The practical investigation would be extended to include more scenes from Carmen, and particularly a more extensive practical study of Carmen herself. It would also involve multiple singers, allowing different voice and performers to test whether the interpretative findings remain transferable. Finally, future research could integrate vocal, musical, physical, and dramatic practice more systematically, particularly through stage performance. In this sense, the project would develop from an individual performance case study into a broader framework for character-driven operatic interpretation. The process developed through this project can therefore be summarized as a simple practice framework. What does the core tell me? Analysis. What does the core tell me? To interpret. What does the suggest about the character? To experiment. How can I embody this through my voice? To record. What actually happens in performance? To reflect. What works and what does not? To refine. How should I change my interpretation? This cycle can potentially be updated by Carmen to other operatic repertoire and other character-driven performance problems. In short, my research began with a compression of two oversimplified female protégés. Through musical analysis, comparative singing, and practical experimentation, I discovered that this comparison is far more complex than it appears. Carmen successfully used difference in musical language to portray two women with vastly different personalities. Furthermore, my practice shows that these analytical observations can directly influence vocal interpretation. Therefore, for me, the most important discovery is not BTS core itself, but the changes that occurred in my singing style after I carefully studied it. Perhaps this is the core conclusion of my project. Musical analysis only has meaning for the performer when it can be transformed into embodied artistic knowledge. And this is my references. That's all. Thank you.